Hey, if we haven't met, my name is Kylen. I was here a little bit earlier in the semester. Glad to be back. It is always so special for me to get to be here at Breakaway because Breakaway was massively impactful in my life. Like when I was a student here at Texas A&M, I met the Lord here. Like I learned what it looked like to walk with him. And so I have great hope for you. Like I really believe that special things happen in this space. And so thanks for having me back. It's so good to be here. I don't want to waste time. Like, I believe that the Lord has something really special in store for us. And so we're going to jump in. Like, I'm going to read the text all the way through because I want you to be able to wrap your mind around it. But let me just say this. Like, as I was praying, I was asking God, what do you want me to teach at Breakaway? Like, what do you have for these students? He took me to a passage of scripture that has become so near and dear to me over the course of the last year. You see, when I worked here at Breakaway, I learned a piece of what God's mission for my life would be, which would simply be this: to help people see Jesus rightly. Like that's what I want my life to be about. I want my life to help people see Jesus because I believe that when you see Jesus, you can see everything else. Like I want to widen your view. I want to help you catch a vision for who he is. And the passage that we're looking at tonight, it's what the Lord has given me over the course of the last year to help teach me something new about him. And listen, like it's not going to show up and be like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Jesus, you're compassionate? Like we all know that. But do we get it? Do we believe it? And so I just want to jump into it. And what we're gonna find as we read through this and as we work on it together is that it splits into two different sections. Like we're gonna see a man's condition, we're gonna see the king's compassion. And listen, like if you're taking notes, I don't have a fancy outline for you. Like I'm just gonna pull some stuff out as we go along and you can take notes on it because I want the Spirit to lead the way tonight. Because I think he has something for literally every single one of us. So here it is. If you got a Bible, we're in Mark 1. And so you can flip there. Mark is one of the synoptic gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. You can flip halfway in your Bible. You can keep turning to hit the New Testament. You can flip till you find Mark. Mark 1 means the first page of the book. And this is what it says. It says in verse 40, "And a leper came to him, imploring him, and kneeling, said to him," talking to Jesus, "If you will, you can make me clean." And Jesus, moved with pity, he stretched out his hand and he touched him and he said to him, "I will, be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him and he was made clean. And Jesus sternly charged him and sent him away at once and said to him, "See that you say nothing to anyone, but go and show yourself to the priest and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded as a proof to them." But he went out and he began to talk freely about it, to spread the news so that Jesus could no longer openly enter a town, but was out in desolate places. And people, they were coming to him from every quarter. In March of 2020, my wife, Brooke, and I, we were making our way back from Vail, Colorado after a week of snow skiing to Dallas, Texas. You see, we had driven to Dallas from College Station at the time to meet up with my folks. We were gonna carpool all the way to Colorado. We were carpooling on the way back. And this is March of 2020, so spoiler alert, you know what this is about, COVID, right? Like this is the illustration that everyone is sick of hearing about. But I promise it's for good purpose. So we pull into Dallas and I get a text message from my father-in-law. Now, I love my father-in-law, one of the most prepared individuals I've ever met in life. But this felt a little extreme because he texts me and he's like, "Hey guys, listen, it looks like this whole COVID thing, it might be making landfall in the US very, very soon. So listen, you probably need to go, you need to stock up on groceries because we might have limited access to grocery stores in a matter of days." So as I read this text, I'm like, man, listen, this sounds great in theory, but listen, we're in the 21st century. Like this isn't the apocalypse. I'm gonna be pulling into College Station at 11:30 at night. Is it really that important for me to go get a couple gallons of milk, some frozen chicken breast, some toilet paper? Like, can it not wait till tomorrow? But I get home and I decide to go for it. And listen, fellas, you need to know this. Your father-in-law is always going to be right in your life. And mine undoubtedly was. I don't know how he did it, but he predicted the unpredictable, because literally days later, the coronavirus, this thing that threw our entire nation into a tailspin, that put everybody into self-isolation and quarantine, it hit landfall in Texas, and our world got shaken up. Now, I don't know if you remember what it was like, but people wore masks everywhere they went, right? Everyone's social distance. If you walked into a room, you had to get temperature checked. Like, you had to make sure that you weren't displaying symptoms, otherwise you couldn't go out and be around people. It was a strange time, and yet didn't it become normal so fast? Like, we acclimated really quickly. Like, we had never experienced anything like that before, and yet it became instinctively normal in just a matter of weeks. You see, it was commonplace for us to pass the time doing things the likes of which I never thought I'd be doing in my 20s and 30s. Like, I took up puzzling, all right? Anybody with me? Like, I sat in my house and I was like, all right, Lion King puzzle done. Where's the next one? The Avengers puzzle, that's next. Okay, let's do it. I binge watched The Outer Banks. Anybody? I'm not like, what is it? Kooks and Pogues or whatever. Like, I'm not necessarily one way or the other, but I mean, everybody was binge watching. Like, to pass the time, I went on more walks than I had ever been on in my life. Like, it was commonplace because it was the only thing that I could do to go outside. And yet when I would go outside, if you saw someone walking your direction, like, you wouldn't even just pass by them. Like, you would cordially wave and just turn the other way and walk away from them. Like, this was commonplace in our world. Like, everybody was stuck at home, wearing pajamas, sitting on Zoom calls, avoiding one another like the plague. So why do I bring all that up? Because I want to ask you this. Like, what if it wasn't the entire world that lived that way, but just you? Like, what if people, they didn't avoid one another at all costs, they just avoided you? Like, what if it was actually true that as you would walk across campus, people would be comfortably walking alongside one another, and they would see you, they would turn around, and they would run the other direction? How would it make you feel? Like, it's not that the world was united against this global pandemic. No, the world, they were united against an individual plague named you. How would it feel? I ask you that because while this is just a hypothetical scenario for you and I, this could not be closer to the truth of what this man, this leper, experienced in his day-to-day life from what we just read in Mark chapter 1. You see, this man, he was riddled by a condition that ostracized him from everyone in his society. Like, he was so racked by this illness that people, they pushed him to the side. He was a reject, an outcast. This was his normal day-to-day. And what it says here is that despite him being the personification of what is unacceptable, nobody wanting anything to do with him, he tries to get some help. It says that he comes to Jesus, Mark 1, verse 40, and a leper came to him. A leper. Now, okay, when we read this, I don't know about you, when I read this feels like pretty par for the course for Jesus, right? Like, the guy shows up, he heals the sick and lame. Like, this is very standard practice, a normal day in the life of Jesus Christ. But this would have been alarming to the Jewish audience. Like, they would have seen this and it would have thrown so many red flags. Like, it would have been the equivalent in the ancient Near East of Will Smith walking up, slapping Chris Rock at the Oscars, because it would have left everybody gasping in the moment and gossiping days afterwards. Like, it would have been an absolute alarm. Why? Well, we have to understand something about this guy's condition. He's a leper, right? So what does that mean? He has leprosy. Well, what is leprosy? Leprosy, to put it very simply, is a skin disease. It's a skin disease that would have taken this guy and it would have covered him in sores, in boils. They would have been swollen. They would have itched. They would have bled. It would have been all across his body. His chest, his arms, his legs. It would have been on his face, on his head. It would have been in his joints so that when he would move, it would hurt. His hair, it would have been white. Like it would have grown white and it would have assumed the texture of wool. Like this is what leprosy did to this man. And what it would do is if it developed, if it went untreated, which they had no way to treat it, what would happen is it would cause him to become blind. It would lead him towards paralysis. It would even cause nerve damage and eventually death. Like this was this man's situation. Leprosy, such a gruesome illness to have. And it was believed to be extremely contagious. Like people avoided this guy at all costs for two different reasons. They feared that they could catch it, and two, they feared that if they touched him, it would make them unclean. Which begs the question, what does it mean to be unclean? 30,000 foot, like real quick. To be unclean meant that you were unfit to come into the presence of God. You see, the Jews, they observed the Old Testament law, the law of Moses. And so if they did not keep the law, there were a set of different requirements that could cause them to become unclean, one of which were infectious diseases. At the top of that list was leprosy. So this is this guy's situation. Why unpack all of that? Because this guy, his life circumstance, his condition, it brings with it so much physical and emotional abuse. Like it would have been considered that he was a danger to everybody surrounding him. And yet for some reason, he braves the risk to come to Jesus. You see, it says that he comes to Jesus. He comes because, for all intents and purposes, though it seems like his situation is hopeless, he recognizes that feelings of hopelessness, they stem from illusions of helplessness. That feelings of hopelessness, that I'm hopeless, like that actually, it's rooted in the illusion that I'm helpless. This guy sees Jesus and he says, I'm not helpless. That guy can help me. I'm not hopeless because he can save me. So earlier this year, my wife and I, we took a trip over to Nashville. I'd never been to Nashville. We get on a plane. It was very standard. Like we hop on board and we set to take off to Nashville, and eventually the flight attendant, she comes on over the intercom and she gives us a very general announcement. She says, hey everybody, listen, we just wanna let you know that we are about to incur some turbulence. So please, if you could, make your way back to your seat, fasten your seatbelts as we continue our flight. Not uncommon in the slightest, right? All of us have been in that place. What was uncommon is what she said next. She hopped back on the intercom and says, I'm so sorry, attention passengers, I meant to include this. If you are a white knuckle flyer on this flight, I wanna make sure you know that everything is fine, but we are going to be incurring quite a bit of turbulence as we continue our flight. Never fear, though things may get uncomfortable, I assure you, everything is in control. You are completely safe. Now, when this happens, again, I'm not a nervous flyer, but I hear this flight attendant hop online and immediately I'm like, what are we about to fly into? Like, what are we about to find as we continue on our way? Because as I'm flying on this flight, like I look around and what is the nature of your experience on a plane? When things get out of hand, you don't reach for the steering wheel. What do? You reach for a vomit bag. Like you're virtually helpless. Like you can't do anything when things start to feel like they're going awry. And so here I am in the middle of this flight with all of these passengers around me, feeling powerless. And I look outside the window and the skies begin to darken. The rain begins to pour. The conditions begin to worsen. The turbulence finally arrives and things start to shake. Everything feels out of control. And yet in that moment, my stability came by way of remembering what the flight attendant said. That, hey, things may feel out of control, but I assure you, you're completely safe. This plane, it can handle much more than you think. Why do I tell you that? Because that is true for Jesus as well. Like, listen, all of us will incur turbulence in life. Every time, like every one of us, we will walk through life and things will feel out of control in different moments. And yet we can take heart because we know that with Jesus, we have help, that God has not abandoned us. Psalm 46:1, it says, God is our refuge and strength. He's a helper who is always, operative word, always found in times of trouble. He's always on the job. Like he never takes a smoke or coffee break. Like he never punches in or out. Like he is always there to help you in moments when you're in distress. Like for the people of God, no matter how bleak the situation may seem or dreadful our circumstances may feel, God is there. We are never without help. God is always ready to spring into action. This man, his situation is more hopeless than every one of ours. He is a multi-layered problem. He is physically ill, he is socially unacceptable, and he is spiritually unclean. And yet he still finds a way to hold on to hope. How? He knows that if he can come to Jesus, if Jesus is who he says he is, the Son of God, then Jesus has help to offer. So he comes to him. Friends, I don't know if that resonates with you. If you are at a place in your life where you feel like, man, it feels like I have multi-layered issues. The pressure of my parents, the stress of school, the desire for a relationship that I can't seem to find, uncertainty about what my future looks like when I walk across the stage that's just behind this curtain. Like, I feel like there's so many problems in my life. I feel as if I'm hopeless. Listen, take a lesson from the leper. Come to Jesus. He has help to offer. And yet he doesn't stop there. We see in verse 40, it says, and a leper came to him, imploring him, and kneeling said to him, if you will, Jesus, you can make me clean. Like, what's the next move this leper makes? Like, first he comes to Jesus. What's the second thing he does? He kneels. Like, he comes to Jesus and he takes a knee. Why? Like, why does he come and he hits a knee when he sees Jesus? Because this is the only appropriate response when you're in the presence of the king. Like when you're in the presence of royalty, you bow low. Why? Like think about kneeling. What's true when you hit your knees? It is the most vulnerable position possible. Like if somebody were to come at you and attack you, you are not in a physical position to spring to your feet real quick. Like to dodge if a blow comes, to strike someone if they're above you. Like it's a vulnerable spot, and yet he embraces this position. So a few months ago, I threw my back out, right? I was at the gym, it's hidden leg day. Guys, we don't skip leg day. And I was finishing it up and I felt my back tweak. And I was like, okay, you know what? I'm done. I've already finished my workout. I'm at the end of this thing. Let me rack my weights. Let me go over to the ab mats. Let me roll my back out. Let me get myself straight. And I got up and I felt great. I felt amazing. So I walked out of the gym and I had to go run a few errands, Home Depot. And so I walk into Home Depot. I get some boxes, some different things that we had ordered. And I come home and I'm unloading stuff. And I go to set down a box. It weighed 15 pounds. And as I went to set it down, my back locked up. Yo, I'm in my 30s. Like, this isn't supposed to happen to me. And I couldn't do anything but fall to my knees and army crawl back into the house. Life alert, man. Like, I had fallen and I couldn't get back up. Like, we're laughing, but it was bad, all right? Like it was a bad spot. I couldn't stand on my own. I couldn't walk on my own. I couldn't change my own clothes. I couldn't bend over to pull up my pants. Like I was in a helpless position. I was virtually incapacitated. How did I get better? Well, it took me a little bit to learn that I had to humble myself and allow my sweet wife to help me. Guys, you don't want your wife to pull up your britches. It's a weak spot to be, man. And yet I needed her help. You see, so long as I resisted her, as long as I operated in pride, what I found is that I wasn't getting better. In fact, I was only setting myself back. But when I actually humbled myself and I got her help, I began to improve. I began to get better. Why do I tell you that? Because that's what the leper does here. He comes and he kneels before Jesus. He knows that to receive the king's compassion, to get the help that he wants, he has to embrace a posture of humility. One of my favorite verses, it's Isaiah 66:2. It's in my office. It says this is the one to whom I will look. He who is humble, contrite in spirit, and trembles at my word. He who is humble, contrite in spirit, and trembles at my word. Listen, if you want God to look upon you, this is the recipe. Like, they're your ingredients, those three things, the first of which is humility. Like God, he looks upon those that don't presume anything of themselves. He sees those that recognize like, man, I don't deserve anything in life. What is the opposite of humility? Pride, like arrogance. And I deserve this mentality. Can I just be a friend to you? And I deserve this mentality. That is a dangerous mentality to have. James 4:6, it says, God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Like, listen, God will either stiff arm you in your pride or he will wrap an arm around you in your humility. It is one or the other. Another way to put it is pride closes the hand of God, but humility, it opens the hand of God. God has grace for those that are humble, and this guy knows it. Like he knows that he has to come low, that he has to approach Jesus in humility. And yet what we see is he does come to Jesus, though he is full of humility, there's some uncertainty. Like he has some uncertainty about Jesus. Like he says this, he says, if you will, Jesus, you can make me clean. Now I don't know about you, but when I read that originally, it sounded like a question. I misread it. I thought it said, Jesus, if you can, will you make me clean? But that's not what he's saying. He comes to Jesus, he says, Jesus, if you will, you can make me clean. You see, Jesus, this man, he has no question about Jesus' capability. He has questions about Jesus' character. Like he knows, Jesus, you're capable, but do you actually care enough to help me? And I think that some of us could resonate with that. Like this guy, he sees Jesus correctly, he just doesn't see Jesus completely. Like he knows that Jesus is full of capability, like he can step in and help, but he's uncertain if Jesus actually wants to. Listen, this is so important. And so if you don't take anything else tonight, take this with you. Jesus is merciful enough to care, and he is powerful enough to help. Always. He is both capable and he is compassionate. He will wrap an arm around you in his grace and supply you with what you need. I assure you, what you need, it may not be what you want, but it will be what you need. He knows best, and he will supply it because he is a very present help when we are in need. And the final thing that we see in verse 40 is that the leper, he comes to Jesus, he kneels to Jesus, and then he begs of Jesus. Like he looks at Jesus and he implores him to make him clean. Now what's interesting about this request is think about what he's saying. Like what's the guy's situation? We've talked about it a lot tonight. We've unpacked it. Like the guy is full of leprosy. Luke would say that his condition is advanced. So why doesn't he ask Jesus to heal him? Like, Jesus, will you make me well? That would feel appropriate, right? Like that would seem to make more sense. And yet he comes to Jesus and he says, no, Jesus, will you make me clean? Like what's that about? This is such a profound idea, and this is why it has resonated with me for so long. This man, he is less concerned about the condition of his skin, and he's more concerned about the condition of his soul. He needs to be made well, sure, but he wants to be made clean. Why? You see, his leprosy, it not only alienated him from everyone else in his society, from the presence of other people, it alienated him from the presence of God. Like more than wanting to have relief from his pain, more than wanting freedom from humiliation, more than wanting social acceptance, he just wants to be with God. Like that's all he wants. Like more than anything else, he's like, I just want to be with you, Lord. Like my condition, it doesn't allow me because it makes me unclean to come into your presence at the temple. And I can't even atone for my sins. Like I'm living in a perpetual state of judgment. And yet all I want is to be with you. Here's what's amazing, breakaway. He is standing in this story in the presence of God. The Son of God, the God-man is standing and he is hearing his every need. And what's fascinating is that he wants to help. So here's the lesson we can take from this. This guy, he proves to us that we have to get to the heart of our issues. We've got to get to the heart of our issues because it's possible for us, listen, it is possible for us to move through life and be blind to our defilement, to that thing that makes you unclean. It's possible to be blind to it. We have to get to the heart of it. We have to understand that our problems, they are not just skin deep, they are sin deep. Like your issues, any external despair that you experience physically in life, it is the result of an internal dilemma that you experience spiritually. What is the name of that internal dilemma? Sin. Sin. What does sin want to do? It wants to distance you from the presence of God, and it wants to defile you from ever returning. This man knows that he needs to be made clean. Do you? What do you need to be made clean from? What do you need God to step in and cleanse you of? These are the lessons we pick up from this man's condition. And what we see as he comes and he kneels and he begs of Jesus is that his condition prompts the king's compassion, that Jesus steps in to meet him right where he is. And so we're gonna look at a few things the king does, and these are gonna go fast. But it says this in Mark 40, we'll start from the beginning. And a leper came to him, imploring him and kneeling, said to him, "If you will, you can make me clean, God. You can make me clean, Jesus." Jesus, moved with pity, stretches out his hand and touches him and says to him, "I will. Be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him and he was made clean. I don't know if you hear it, but when this story turns to Jesus, it's as if everything moves into slow motion. Like you can see every action that Jesus is taking. Like, why do we watch things in slow motion? Like, why is the most famous slow motion scene in cinematic history a scene of Neo from The Matrix dodging bullets? Like, why is that significant? Why do they have to slow it down? Because it increases the drama. It magnifies the smallest, fastest moving object on the screen so that it is not only noticeable, but it's important to us. Like, we can see bullets for Neo. When this thing slows down, we're meant to pay attention to Jesus. How is he engaging this guy? And what we learn is that first, Jesus welcomes the unwanted. Jesus welcomes the unwanted. Like, think about the scene. Like Jesus in Matthew, he's just finished the Sermon on the Mount. In verse 37, right before this passage, this section that we're looking at, it says that people were looking for him. People are swarming Jesus. Like the masses are all around him. He's like the hot new thing. He is the most popular thing on the block. Everybody wants a piece of him. Everyone can't get enough. They want to see as much of Jesus as they can get. And yet what Jesus does is he sees in the midst of the multitudes, he sees the marginalized. He doesn't miss this guy. Like he sees the guy that is an outsider, that is a reject, that has been cast out of the societal inner circle. Jesus, he never misses the marginalized for the multitudes. To put it a different way, he prioritizes the outcasts over the in crowd. This is the heart of Jesus. This is the heart of a compassionate king. And this is good news for us if we're actually honest with ourselves. Because if we, real talk, like if we just got brutally honest, every one of us, there are no exceptions in the room, have parts of our lives that would make us rejectable to other people. Things that we fear, like, man, if that ever got exposed, what would people think? Like, what would they do with me? Every one of us has something like that. The good news for you, the good news for me, is Jesus isn't afraid of it. He sees it, and it actually motivates him to move towards you. I love the way that Dane Ortland says it. He says, where you cringe most painfully, Christ hugs most invincibly. Breakaway, that piece of you that feels too defiled, that part of your life that feels too dirty, that piece of yourself that you despise most of all, Jesus looks at it, he looks past it, and he bids you come to him anyways. He says, I see the worst of you. Come here. Listen, I want you exactly as you are, and I will help make you into what you're meant to be. This is the heart of Jesus. This is what compassion looks like from our King. And yet, as Jesus goes on, he does something even more unprecedented. It says in verse 41 again that he stretched out his hand and he touched him. You see, the second thing that Jesus does is he touches this guy. Why is that so scandalous? Well, we talked about it a minute ago. To touch this man would put Jesus at risk for two things. He could be contaminated, and he would certainly be made unclean. And leprosy is an incurable disease, one in which would render Jesus unclean forever. So why does Jesus take the risk? Like, Jesus has already proven it. Like, man, he can heal anybody with but a word. Like, he doesn't have to touch this guy. Like, why does he reach out to touch this man that hasn't been touched in likely years? Because this guy knows, Jesus, you're capable, but I don't know that you care. Jesus touches him to demonstrate, oh, do I care? Like, I'm not only willing to help, I am overwhelmingly willing to help. I'm not afraid of your leprosy. And what's fascinating is this guy's leprosy, it doesn't transfer to Jesus. Jesus' holiness transfers to this guy. He is the Son of God. He is the Son of God. So in 2013, a 53-year-old man named Vinicio Riva made a journey to Vatican City. I remember hearing this story sitting in these seats right where you are when former executive director Ben Stewart shared it with us. And what we learned from the story is that Riva is not your average man, because Vinicio, from the age of 15, has suffered from a condition called neurofibromatosis, which is an illness that left him with tumors all over his body. Tumors that swell, that itch, that bleed. This is a photo of him. This disease, it's genetic. It's not contagious, but it is infamous for the psychological trauma it causes in the life of its victims. For Vinicio specifically, people are typically afraid to even come close to him because they fear that if they come close to him, even in his presence, they might get sick themselves. So in November of 2013, Riva, accompanying his aunt, went to the Pope's weekly Wednesday audience in Vatican City, in Rome. And as they went, they had zero expectation for their time there. They were just going to the audience just to attend. And yet, as his aunt recalls the event, she says this: "We didn't think that we would get so close to the Pope, but the Swiss guard, they kept ushering us forward until we were in a corner in the front row. And then the Pope came close to us. And I thought he would give me his hand. Like, surely that's what he would do. But instead, he went straight to Vinicio and he embraced him." She recounts, "I thought he wouldn't give him back to me. He held him so tightly." Vinicio himself recalls the event, which lasted only just over a minute, as feeling like paradise and spanning the length of an eternity. Friends, it is the same, if not greater, with Jesus. Jesus is not threatened by your condition. Whatever it is in your life that makes you, leads you to feel unclean, there is nothing that Jesus is threatened by about you that would keep him from coming near. Just as he reached out to this leper, he reaches out to each and every one of us. He wants to touch you in the place of your life that you don't want anyone to know or reach into. Like Jesus, he touches the untouchable. Like what we find is that Jesus, his desire is to reach in and touch you in that place where your shame feels most prevalent. He wants to reach in and touch that area where your fear is most dominant. He wants to reach in and touch that place where your addiction feels like it will never let go. Jesus touches the untouchable. He is willing to touch your insecurities. He is willing to touch you in your past. Because make no mistake about it, one touch from Jesus can change a person's life forever. Forever. The question is, do you want him to make you well? And what we see as we end our time together is that Jesus ultimately heals this guy. He sees him, he touches him, and lastly, he heals him. It says in verse 42, and immediately, think about that. Like this guy lived in leprosy, and immediately it's gone. Like in an instant, because Jesus reached out and healed him, the leprosy is gone. It left him, and he was made clean. Breakaway, we have spent this entire passage talking about Jesus as the compassionate king, the one who's willing to step in and heal you in the places where you hurt most horrendously. And what we see as this story ends is that Jesus, he looks like every bit the compassionate king, doesn't he? Like he steps in and he not only gives to this leper everything he needs, which is to be made clean, but he gives this leper everything he wants. Like he heals him of his illness. Does that mean he will do it for you? Will he give you everything you want? That's not the promise of this text. The promise of the scripture is that Jesus will step in and that thing that is distancing you from God, that thing that is holding you at bay from being with the King of Kings forever, he will step in and he will remove the blockade because he wants to be with you. Whatever defiles you, he can cleanse it. Like this leper, think about how long he must have begged God to help him. How many years did he pray and ask the Lord to intervene? Like how many times did he sit in his room and wonder, God, will you ever demonstrate the kind of mercy I know to be true of you? When will this come to an end? He is desperate for sure, beaten down no doubt, and yet what's amazing about this man is he never loses hope. He holds on to hope when it feels like all hope is lost. How does he do it? What hope is there for us in this text? That God always does what's best. That even when things feel as if they will not get any worse, God always does what's best. He gives to you what you need, what will ultimately give you the satisfaction that he is offering. Not the world, not the things on this earth, but the things that only he can give. He will meet you in that place. How do we know it? Because when the world was at its worst, God did what was best. God sent his only son into a world infected by a plague, not of sickness or circumstances, but sin. And Jesus, where he doesn't absorb this man's illness, looks upon our sin and the consequences of it, the fact that it would bring us to death and damnation, never allowing us to be with God again. And he says, I'll absorb that. I'll absorb that. Friends, if you have any question, Jesus, will you make me clean? He said, I will go in their place. I will make you clean. I will go to the cross. I will endure your shame. I will bear your iniquities. I will be crushed by the wrath of God that is deserving for you because I want to be with you. I want you with me forever. Like friends, as we think about leprosy, just like sin defiles and incapacitates people, Just like leprosy, sin causes distance and breakdown in relationships. Just like leprosy, sin results in loneliness and hopelessness for people. Just like leprosy, sin grows progressively worse, eating away at its victims until they eventually expire in death. And just like leprosy, sin had no human cure, so God sends his son. I will make them clean. I will do whatever it takes to get them back to myself. The question, friends, is not, Jesus, will you make me clean? The question instead is, will you come to him so that he can?